The air in the office was thick with tension. The steady hum of computers, the rhythmic tapping of keyboards, and the occasional murmur of hushed conversations all seemed to pause as the door to Michael Carter's office slammed shut. Ethan Walker stood frozen, his heart pounding. Just moments ago, his boss, Richard Gaines, had called him in with an expression colder than the winter rain pounding against the office windows. Now, that cold had settled deep in Ethan's chest. Richard leaned back in his chair, fingers tapping against his mahogany desk. "You've been a valuable employee, Ethan," he said, his voice void of warmth. "But I run a professional workplace, and I can't have someone like you ruining the company's image." Ethan's stomach twisted. Someone like me? He knew exactly what Richard meant. This wasn't about performance. It wasn't about work ethic. It was about something personal. Something Ethan had never let define his job. "You're fired," Richard said bluntly, sliding a termination letter across the desk. Ethan swallowed hard. Just like that, years of dedication were erased, all because of who he was. Outside, his co-workers glanced up as he stepped into the open-plan office, clutching the letter. Whispers started. Eyes lingered. But before anyone could react, another door opened, one that would change everything. Ethan Walker had always believed in hard work. Growing up in a small town with conservative values, he learned early that life wasn't always kind to people like him. But he never let that stop him. He graduated top of his class, packed his bags, and moved to the city with nothing but ambition and a dream, to build a career where his skills mattered more than anything else. For 5 years, he poured his heart into Harper & Company, a rising marketing firm known for its competitive edge. He started as an intern, staying late, working weekends, proving himself. His creativity and persistence earned him a full-time position, then a promotion. Now, at 29, he was one of the best project managers in the company. Clients respected him. His team valued him. But not everyone did. Richard Gaines, the regional director, had always made things difficult for Ethan. His comments, subtle at first, grew sharper over time. "You should dress more professional, Ethan. Less flashy. Or, we have a certain image to uphold. Clients don't like distractions." Ethan ignored it, brushing it off as corporate politics. But deep down, he knew, Richard didn't see him as an asset. He saw him as a problem. The Harper & Company office was sleek and modern, nestled in a towering skyscraper overlooking the city. Glass walls let in the golden glow of the morning sun. Open workstations encouraged collaboration, and stylish meeting rooms buzzed with creative energy. Ethan thrived in this space. It was more than just a job, it was his passion. His team, Jess, Marcus, and Lily, were more than co-workers. They were friends, allies in the fast-paced world of marketing. Jess, sharp-witted and fiercely loyal, always had his back. Marcus, calm and analytical, kept the team grounded. And Lily, the newest recruit, idolized Ethan's ability to turn even the toughest projects into success. But now, as he stood there gripping his termination letter, the office felt different. Colder. Smaller. Conversations had halted. Eyes flickered toward him, confusion and concern clear on their faces. Jess was the first to move, standing from her desk. "Ethan, what's going on?" He opened his mouth, but the words caught in his throat. And then, before he could process what had just happened, the elevator doors slid open. A tall figure stepped out, commanding attention with effortless authority. Michael Carter, the company's CEO. He wasn't scheduled to be in this office today. His unexpected presence sent a ripple through the floor. Employees straightened in their chairs. Conversations hushed. Michael's sharp blue eyes scanned the room, then landed directly on Ethan. A beat of silence. And then, in a voice that carried across the office, he asked the question that would change everything. "Ethan, why do you look like you've just been blindsided?" Ethan's grip on the termination letter tightened as the CEO, Michael Carter, took measured steps toward him. The entire office felt frozen in time, eyes darting between the two men. No one had expected the CEO to visit today, least of all Ethan, especially not at the very moment his career had just been torn away from him. Michael stopped a few feet away, his piercing gaze flicking from Ethan's face to the paper in his hand. "Ethan," he repeated, his voice controlled but firm. "What's going on?" Ethan hesitated, his pulse hammering in his ears. He could feel Richard Gaines's glare burning into the side of his face. Would speaking up make things worse? Or did he even have anything left to lose? Richard, ever the composed corporate shark, stepped forward with a rehearsed smile. "Mr. Carter, there's no issue here. Just a standard employment decision." Michael didn't look at Richard. His attention remained locked on Ethan. Something in the CEO's steady, expectant stare emboldened him. Swallowing hard, he held up the termination letter for everyone to see. "I was just fired," he said, his voice quieter than he intended but firm enough. "Effective immediately." A murmur rippled through the office. Jess covered her mouth in shock. Marcus shot Richard a dark look. Lily's eyes filled with disbelief. Michael's jaw tensed. "Fired? Why?" Richard's smile didn't waver, but his fingers twitched at his sides. "It was a necessary decision," he said smoothly. "Ethan's presence has become distracting. We have an image to uphold, and certain behaviors don't align with our company's values." The room fell into suffocating silence. Ethan felt the weight of every gaze on him. There it was. The truth laid bare. Richard hadn't even bothered to dress it up with corporate jargon. Michael's eyes narrowed ever so slightly. He turned his full attention to Richard, his expression unreadable. "Let me get this straight," he said evenly. "You fired one of our top project managers, someone whose work has directly contributed to our biggest accounts, because you personally don't approve of his identity?" Richard hesitated for the first time, clearly caught off guard by the directness of the question. "It's about professionalism," he deflected. "Certain clients have expectations." Michael cut him off with a sharp glance. Then, without another word, he reached out and took the termination letter from Ethan's hand. Slowly, deliberately, he ripped it in half. A gasp rippled through the room. Ethan's breath hitched. Michael turned back to Ethan. "You're not fired," he said, his voice unwavering. "But Richard—" He turned to the stunned regional director, a cold edge creeping into his tone. "We need to have a serious conversation." And just like that, the power dynamic shifted. The game had changed. Ethan could still feel the torn edges of the letter in his trembling fingers. The weight that had crushed his chest just moments ago lifted slightly, but the room still pulsed with tension. He wasn't fired, but what did that mean? Would this be a temporary victory before another battle? Would Richard find another way to push him out? Michael Carter stood tall, his expression unreadable. The CEO was a figure Ethan had only seen in company newsletters and the occasional conference stream. To have him standing here, personally intervening, was surreal. Richard, on the other hand, was rigid, his jaw locked in frustration. Michael turned to him. "My office." "No." Richard inhaled sharply but didn't argue. He turned and stalked toward the elevators, disappearing inside. The doors slid shut with a heavy finality. The second he was gone, the office erupted into whispers. Jess rushed to Ethan's side. "Holy, are you okay?" Ethan exhaled shakily. "I don't know." Marcus folded his arms. "I knew Gaines was an ass, but this? Firing you for that?" He shook his head. "It's messed up." Lily's voice was small. "What happens now?" Ethan wished he had an answer. He had spent years walking on eggshells, proving himself over and over, hoping that if he was good enough, worked hard enough, he could outrun people like Richard Gaines. But in the end, it had never been about his performance. Minutes passed before Ethan's computer chimed with an incoming email. From CEO Michael Carter. Subject: Meeting request. Ethan hesitated. It wasn't a request. It was a command. Jess gave him a reassuring squeeze on the shoulder. "Whatever happens, we've got your back." Ethan nodded and made his way to the executive floor, nerves twisting inside him. The offices up here were sleek, silent, a stark contrast to the vibrant hum of his usual workspace. When he reached the CEO's door, he hesitated before knocking. "Come in," Michael's voice called. Ethan stepped inside. Michael sat at his desk, while Richard stood stiffly near the window. His face was a mask of forced composure. Michael gestured to a chair. "Sit." Ethan obeyed, feeling small under the weight of the moment. Michael laced his fingers together. "I'll be direct. What happened today is unacceptable. Harper and Company does not tolerate discrimination. But before I make any decisions, I want to hear from you." Ethan blinked. "Hear from me?" Michael nodded. "Richard claims he let you go due to professionalism issues. I don't buy it. Tell me the truth." Ethan's throat tightened. He had spent years keeping his head down, swallowing every microaggression, every passive-aggressive remark, every time Richard had subtly excluded him from important meetings. Now, Michael was giving him a chance to be seen. He took a breath. "It wasn't about my performance. I've worked hard. I've brought in major clients. My team," he hesitated, gathering himself. "My team respects me. But Richard has made it clear, time and time again, that I don't fit his vision of this company." Michael's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes sharpened. Richard scoffed. "This is ridiculous. Ethan is playing victim. I made a business decision." Michael raised a hand, silencing him. "A business decision that could have landed us in legal trouble." His voice was calm, but there was an edge to it. "Do you know how many CEOs get brought down because they let people like you make business decisions based on personal biases?" Richard paled slightly. Michael turned back to Ethan. "I won't allow this to happen in my company. So, here's what's going to happen." He leaned forward. "Richard is being placed on immediate leave while HR conducts an internal investigation. Effective today, you will report directly to me." Ethan's mouth went dry. "Report to you?" Michael nodded. "I want to see firsthand what you bring to this company. Your skills. Your leadership. I want you to prove, not to me, but to yourself, that no one gets to decide your worth but you." Richard's face twisted with barely concealed fury. "You can't be serious." Michael's gaze snapped to him. "I am serious. And if you have a problem with that, Richard, you're welcome to resign." The room went silent. Richard's mouth opened, then closed. He knew when he was outplayed. Without another word, he turned and stormed out. Michael exhaled and leaned back. "Ethan, I know this is a lot. But I need you to understand something. I don't believe in saving people who don't deserve it. I believe in recognizing talent. And I see talent in you." Ethan swallowed hard. No one had ever said that to him before. For the next few weeks, everything changed. Ethan was no longer invisible. He sat in executive meetings, pitching ideas directly to Michael. He led campaigns without Richard sabotaging him. He still felt the weight of past doubts, the whispers that lingered when he passed by certain offices. But Michael's belief in him became an anchor. Jess, Marcus, and Lily stood by him, cheering him on. When he landed the biggest account of the quarter, it was Jess who threw her arms around him first, shouting, "Hell yes, Ethan!" Still, doubts crept in at night. Did he really belong here? Was this just Michael proving a point? One evening, long after the office had emptied, Ethan found himself still at his desk, reviewing numbers. He barely noticed the sound of someone entering until a familiar voice spoke. "You do that a lot." He looked up. Michael stood by the door, watching him. "Do what?" Ethan asked. Michael stepped inside. "Overthink. Doubt yourself." He paused. "I meant what I said, Ethan. I didn't put you in this position to make a statement. I put you here because you're damn good at what you do." Ethan let out a shaky breath. "It's hard to believe that sometimes." Michael's expression softened. "Then believe this, people like Richard. They're relics of a dying era. You're the future." Ethan let those words settle inside him. For the first time in his career, he wasn't just surviving. He was winning. Ethan stood in the center of the Harper and Company boardroom, a place where, just weeks ago, he had never imagined himself. The massive table stretched before him, occupied by executives who had barely acknowledged his existence before. Now, they were all watching him. Some curious, some skeptical. At the head of the table, Michael Carter sat with his hands folded, his expression unreadable. He had given Ethan this opportunity, but now it was up to him to prove he deserved it. Today, Ethan was presenting the biggest campaign pitch of his career. The client, one of the most influential brands in the industry, was known for being cutthroat. If Ethan could sell them on his vision, It would cement his place in the company for good. If he failed, it would only give Richard Gaines and others like him the ammunition they needed to undo everything. As he set up his final slide, Ethan took a breath. This was it. Just as he was about to begin, the doors to the boardroom swung open, and in walked Richard Gaines. A hush fell over the room. Ethan's stomach twisted. Richard was supposed to be gone. On leave. Under investigation. And yet, here he was, smirking like he owned the place. Michael's sharp gaze flicked to Richard. "You're not supposed to be here." Richard ignored him and slid into an empty seat, crossing his arms. "I wouldn't miss this for the world." Ethan's grip on the clicker tightened. He knew exactly what Richard was doing. He wanted him to fail. To rattle him. To remind him that, no matter how high he climbed, there would always be someone waiting to tear him down. For a brief moment, fear crept in. But then, something shifted. Ethan remembered every late night spent perfecting this pitch. Every project he had saved. Every moment he had fought to prove his worth, not just to others, but to himself. He would not let Richard take this moment from him. Ethan straightened his shoulders, turned to the client, and began. His voice was steady. His words, clear. He walked them through the strategy, painting a vision of the brand's future that was bold, innovative, undeniable. As he spoke, he saw something incredible happening. People were listening. Not just waiting for their turn to talk. Listening. Even Richard's smirk had faded. When Ethan reached the final slide, he took a breath. This campaign isn't just about selling a product. It's about telling a story that people will believe in. One that will set your brand apart, not just in numbers, but in impact. Silence. And then, applause. The client's lead executive leaned forward, smiling. "That was brilliant." Ethan exhaled, the weight in his chest finally lifting. Michael stood, clapping once. "Well done, Ethan." Richard, for the first time, looked truly defeated. Ethan met his gaze. And this time, he wasn't afraid. The boardroom emptied slowly, murmurs of excitement trailing after the departing executives. The client's enthusiastic handshake still tingled on Ethan's palm, but the adrenaline pumping through his veins kept him standing tall. He had done it. He had walked into this meeting as a man with everything to prove and walked out with everything he had worked for finally recognized. Michael Carter approached him, a rare glint of approval in his sharp blue eyes. "That was one of the best pitches I've seen in years." Ethan let out a small, disbelieving laugh. "Thank you." Michael nodded. "No, thank you. Because today, you didn't just prove your worth. You reminded me why I built this company in the first place." He patted Ethan's shoulder. "You're officially leading this campaign. Effective immediately." Ethan blinked. "Wait. I'm leading it." Michael gave a slight smile. "You earned it." A new kind of disbelief settled in his chest. Not the fear of being overlooked, or dismissed, or forced to fight for scraps. This was real. He had won on his own merit. Just as Michael turned to leave, Ethan's gaze flickered to Richard, who still lingered near the back of the boardroom. His expression was unreadable, but Ethan could see the anger just beneath the surface. For years, Richard had wielded power like a weapon, using it to push down people he didn't respect, didn't understand, or didn't deem worthy. Today, that power had been taken from him. Ethan took a slow step toward him. "You lost today, Richard," he said, his voice steady, not out of spite, but out of truth. Richard scoffed, shaking his head. "Enjoy it while it lasts. People like you. People like me." Ethan interrupted, tilting his head. "You mean people who work hard? People who don't let men like you define their future?" Richard's jaw tightened. Ethan exhaled, his voice softer now. "You should ask yourself why you needed to keep me down in the first place." He held Richard's gaze for a long, silent moment before stepping past him, leaving him standing in the wreckage of his own making. When Ethan returned to his floor, the moment he stepped off the elevator, he was met with cheers. Jess practically tackled him in a hug. "I knew it. I freaking knew it. You crushed it, didn't you?" Marcus grinned, arms crossed. "They gave you the lead, didn't they?" Lily's eyes were wide. "Oh my God, is Richard gone?" Ethan confirmed. At least for now. A collective whoop erupted around him. For the first time in his life, Ethan felt something different from relief, from survival. He felt triumph. That night, after the excitement settled and he sat alone in his apartment, he finally let himself take it all in. Years of doubting himself. Years of being careful, never too much, never too bold, never too loud. But now, he saw it clearly. It was never about being enough. He had always been enough. He just had to stop waiting for permission to take up space. A notification buzzed on his phone. A simple email from Michael Carter. Subject, your future. Message, let's talk soon. I see leadership potential in you. Ethan smiled. The story wasn't over. It was just beginning. 1 year later, Ethan stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of his new office, watching the city skyline glow under the golden hues of sunset. His name was now etched on the door, Senior Director of Creative Strategy. The journey here hadn't been easy. There had been challenges, lingering doubts, and moments when he wondered if he truly belonged. But every time those thoughts crept in, he reminded himself, he had earned this. Not because of anyone's approval, not because of a favor, but because he was damn good at what he did. Richard Gaines never returned to Harper & Company. The internal investigation had confirmed everything. His discriminatory practices, his toxic leadership, the countless employees who had been pushed out because they didn't fit. He had been removed quietly, a footnote in the company's history. Michael Carter had kept his word. He mentored Ethan, challenged him, and ultimately gave him the space to lead. Under Ethan's guidance, the company had adopted more inclusive hiring practices, expanded its reach, and shattered old biases. Jess, Marcus, and Lily remained by his side. The team had grown, but their loyalty had never wavered. Ethan turned back to his desk, running a hand over the latest campaign proposal, the biggest project of his career yet. He exhaled, steady and sure. He had spent years shrinking himself, afraid of being too much. But now, he took up space. And he wasn't afraid anymore.